police departments. This is sitting down and taking a look at exactly what they do and have been doing and looking at it through a new lens of reform and reinvention. Because this has been 40, 50 years in the making.
New York taking the first steps in tackling police reform. Governor Cuomo signing several sweeping bills. We'll tell you all about them.
Plus, the Republican National Convention is expected to take place in Jacksonville, Florida. But the day has a lot of black people upset.
Not to mention the president's choice of days and location for his first official rally after the pandemic. We're having a look at the historic meaning of Juneteenth and why some are so very upset. BNC Prime News begins now. The death of George Floyd is sparking change all around the world, especially here in the United States, of course. Good evening, everyone. I'm Fred Hickman.
And I'm Laverne McGee. Thanks for joining us. One of the biggest changes is police reform, and New York is taking the lead once again. BNC's Ashley LIOTUS has the latest.
They are some of the most aggressive reforms in the nation. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo put pen to paper on Friday, making it official.
Everyone who helped on this campaign. It was a long time coming, but it came, and thank you all.
The governor signed the state legislature's repeal of 50A, giving the public transparency of police officers' records. He did it alongside mothers of men who died in police custody.
Congratulations, the bills are signed. Whoa. There you go, brother. Thank you. Thank you, Mama.
Then he took it one step further.
I'm going to sign an executive order today. Will require local governments and police departments all across the state, about 500, to develop a plan that reinvents and modernizes police strategies and programs in their community. They must formulate a plan. They have to address the use of force by police officers, crowd management, community policing, bias awareness, de-escalation, restorative justice, community-based outreach. They have to have a transparent citizen complaint disposition procedure. So if you make a complaint, it's not just yelling out the window. You find out what happened to that complaint. They should talk about appropriate equipment, what's not appropriate equipment, and any other issue that that community believes is relevant. That discussion has to happen with the community participants in the room. That plan then has to be enacted into local law. Every city, every county. It has to be done by April 1. If it's not done by April 1, and if it's not passed, they're not going to be eligible for state funding, period.
The governor saying there must be trust between the community and police. If there is no trust, the relationship does not work. Reverend Al Sharpton praised that executive order, something he has been working toward since he was a teenager.
We will monitor it and make sure that it is enforced, but we had nothing to enforce, which is why we had to keep going. These bills mean some substantive change so that we won't be sitting here going over this after the next funeral and after the next situation.
Reverend Sharpton added, by signing these bills, it's bringing about change. Reporting in New York City for the Black News Channel, I'm Ashley LIOTUS.
President Donald Trump now tasked with trying to pass similar legislation on a national level. He's now also tasked with trying to move the country forward after Mr. Floyd's killing.
And Karen Caifa joined us now outside of the White House with the latest. Karen, how are you this evening?
Good evening, Laverne and Fred. You know, it's been quite a week here in Washington. A lot of lawmakers on Capitol Hill say they want to seize this moment where police reform is very much in the public consciousness. And so that is why we saw both parties, both chambers, moving on some legislation this week. But President Trump and the White House haven't given too many hints as to what they would sign off on. And so that is why a lot of protesters in this city and others have been optimistic, but also cautiously so.
Calls for police reform around the country.
Black Lives Matter.
appear to be heard on Capitol Hill.
I am begging you to speak up. I am begging you to be a part of solving the problems.
Hopefully, we can have both parties working together to actually accomplish something here.
The Congressional Black Caucus took the lead on a reform proposal unveiled by House Democrats Monday.
The power of this movement will help move Congress to act.
Republican Tim Scott of South Carolina planning to introduce a bill in the Senate within days.
Let's see if we can actually get a result and make our streets safer for our law enforcement officers and the communities that they serve.
The parties find common ground in ideas like sharing records of law enforcement officers across states and police forces that better reflect the communities they serve. House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy hinted at some compromise with Democrats, backing, for example, a proposed ban on police chokeholds.
And I think there's a lot of concepts that we agree upon.
But for the most part, Republicans diverge from Democrats' call for federal policing standards, instead advocating incentives for adopting best practices. Neither party answering activist calls to defund the police, cutting funding to forces to put the money into social services. Any legislation passed needs President Trump's signature to become law. In Dallas Thursday, he confirmed an executive order in the works at the White House on policing standards for use of force, including de-escalation tactics.
We're going to make sure that our police are well trained, perfectly trained, they have the best equipment.
And Republican lawmakers have gotten this all started without knowing too much about what the White House and the president have in mind, and they want to move quickly. House Democrats would like to see their bill on the floor during the week of June 22nd, and Senator Tim Scott, the Republican senator who's spearheading the efforts in that chamber, says he would like to see a bill on the floor in that chamber before the July 4th recess. Back to you.
Karen Kafa in Washington, thank you very much.
Outrage is growing over the beating of a Bronx, New York teen. He was allegedly tased on the face multiple times by police who mistook him for a rioter. 16-year-old Jamel Leach was left with facial fractures and damage to his jaw. Leach was arrested on June 1st as he reportedly walked home, not taking part in any of the protests for George Floyd. However, authorities say they saw Leach trying to set a fire before he was struck with a taser. Leach's family says he could be permanently scarred from this incident. His mother and New York Mayor Bill de Blasio are calling for an investigation. Donald Trump is set to accept the Republican nomination for president in Jacksonville, Florida. The August convention was originally set in Charlotte, North Carolina, but the president wanted it moved out of state after the governor told Republicans it couldn't be fully attended because of coronavirus. And the date of the rally is actually causing controversy.
That's true. His acceptance speech is set for August the 27th. That is the same day as Axe Handle Saturday in Jacksonville. That occurred back in 1960. 200 white men attacked black protesters with bats and axe handles. Janice Harris got the chance to speak with an activist about the importance of telling the truth about American history.
For weeks, teenagers, adults, and people of all races have been marching and protesting against racism and injustice. 60 years ago, and then 16-year-old Rodney Hurst was attacked for protesting against racism in a lunch counter sit-in in Jacksonville. It was an attempt to integrate public places. He would become one of many teenagers attacked during what is now called Axe Handle Saturday.
And there were whites in Confederate uniforms passing out free axe handles, but we decided we were going to sit in that day anyway.
This is a photo of one protester covered in blood after being attacked. A mural sits on A. Philip Randolph, marking the day of the Axe Handle Saturday attack as a lesson and reminder of what happened, and to honor those who stood up for justice. Local educators and activists, Dr. Rudy Jameson and Dr. Christopher Jansen, say this is a time for Jacksonville to be honest about its history.
And I think it's significant because it tells a history that had been blacked out, that had been covered up, right? And I think that's a new type of violence that's perpetrated on black folk today.
I think a lot of white people are very comforted by thinking about the civil rights movement as being universally nonviolent. Of course, it was extremely violent, and like Axe Handle Saturday, that violence was committed by white people. to protect this white supremacist ideology.
In August, the world will be watching Jacksonville as it is in the political limelight. These educators believe it is a chance for the city to confront race relations in this country.
The 60th anniversary commemoration of Axe Handle Saturday will happen, again, August 27th at noon.
The president's campaign is protecting itself from lawsuits ahead of his indoor rally in Tulsa, Oklahoma next week. Anyone who attends must agree not to sue the campaign if they contract COVID-19. Those who plan to come must first RSVP for the event. The president has been facing criticism for the rally. It is to be happening on Juneteenth in the city where mobs of white residents attacked black residents and businesses in the Greenwood district. The event has been called the single worst incident of racial violence in American history. President Trump press secretary claims Juneteenth has special meaning to him, but many don't believe that.
Those are beautiful words. They are not any way connected to the truth. He's coming on Juneteenth. Juneteenth means nothing to the president. He's done nothing in the 3.5 years since he's been there to indicate that it means anything to him. He did not reach out to any of the leaders around Black Wall Street and around the massacre site or around Greenwood or Juneteenth even. They didn't reach out, and every other dignitary who's been to town in the last year has reached out, has gotten the tour, has steeped themselves in our history. And so though the spokesperson wrote pretty words, they are not grounded in the truth. No one believes them.
Senators and former presidential candidates Kamala Harris and Cory Booker have both spoken out against the president's decision, calling the move disrespectful.
Dr. Jeremy Levitt, Distinguished Professor of International Law at FAMU's Law School in Orlando, joining us now, talking about the historical significance of Juneteenth and other matters. Jeremy, give us a little backstory on Juneteenth and what it means to us.
Well, Juneteenth is a remarkable date in Black history because after Lincoln adopted by executive order the Emancipation Proclamation on January 1, 1863, enslaved blacks in Texas weren't told that they were free. In fact, they served 2 more years of enslavement than what was necessary by American law. And it was on that date of June 19th that they were notified by Major General Gordon Granger, who landed in Galveston, Texas, that they were free. So Texans actually celebrate Emancipation Proclamation on January 19th rather than January 1st. It's a part of the tradition. It has historical significance because essentially when we talk about servitude, they were forced to be in servitude of Texas authorities and slave owners for 2 more years.
Is it possible that the president intentionally set his appearances in both Jacksonville and Tulsa to cause any type of racial tension?
Well, you know, so sometimes I think we might go a little bit too far. I mean, we're in a conspiratorial period. There's no trust between many Americans and the Trump administration. But to think that there might have been an intentional conspiracy here, that Trump wanted to hold rallies on these very important days in Black history, I find it to be a bit of a stretch. And I think sometimes we go too far. If we were not going to hold rallies as Democrats or Republicans on days where there were massacres or bloody riots, half the calendar would be erased in America.
That's a great point, Jeremy. With the current climate that we live in now, could we see even more political turmoil for the president and for the process ahead of the November election?
Well, the hope is that our young people will continue to protest lawfully using their First Amendment rights until we see reform across the country, that will all participate in some way in the process of deliberation on the way forward. President Trump has talked about holistic stabilization and recovery in terms of his 4-point plan. It sounds like a spa that I would never want to go to, but he's even putting something forward. And I think that what you see out of Governor Cuomo in New York is going to catch fire with states that want to move forward in a progressive way on policing. So he's really developed a model there. But President Trump has a lot of work to do, and it's not likely that he'll ever earn the trust that he's lost.
And speaking of the 4-point plan and what Governor Cuomo is doing in New York, can you talk a little bit about the strength and the, I don't know, almost super strength and strength that shouldn't be in their hands of police unions, some of them around the country today?
Well, listen, police unions have an enormous amount of power. They're there to protect police officers. They serve an important function, but the problem is a police union has rarely, if ever, seen the murder of a black man or a woman in this country and thought it was actually murder. So I think even police unions need to take a deep look at themselves and have a conversation about how they can more transparently protect police officers without taking an approach that makes it appear that anything that a police officer does that's unlawful, any form of misconduct or brutality, is defensible. And the reality and what we're seeing is it's not. For President Trump's part, he really doesn't address the issue. His 4-point plan is there to encourage police agencies to adopt some reforms. And that doesn't even go as far as his Department of Justice in terms of the Department of Justice instituting a decree on police departments after patterns and practices investigations.
All right, Professor Jeremy Levitt from FAMU, thank you so much for your time as always.
My pleasure. Thank you.
A new law honoring Breonna Taylor, how officials in Louisville, Kentucky are adjusting to police reform. The latest details up next.